The goal of this board game is to reach enlightenment, and here's how you can win. Nowadays known as 𝗏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕𝒆𝒏𝒕, this type of game has been played within Japan since at least the 15th century and was an especially popular pastime during New Year celebrations. Stick around till the end to find out more about this Buddhist variant. The rules of 𝗏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕𝒆𝒏𝒕 are quite simple. Its game board oftentimes represents some kind of journey that the players depart upon. The goal of the game is to reach the end of this journey, the so-called agari, which is usually located in the center or at the top of the board. There is no player limit, and the only things needed for setup are player pawns and a single 6-sided die. Players take turns throwing this die and move their pawn according to the face-up number. However, one cannot choose where to move freely. Instead, each square on the board tells the player where to move next, with several options corresponding to possible numbers rolled. Some variants follow a more linear path, whilst others will let you jump all over the game board. For example, if I start the game by rolling a 2 on this particular board, themed after the Japanese arts, I will move to this calligraphy square. If I then roll a 3, I will jump to calligraphy and painting over here. Would I now roll a 5, I would be stuck, since there is no corresponding option on this square. Would I roll a 1, however, I would move to the top of the board and thereby win the game. 𝗏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕𝒆𝒏𝒕 experienced a surge in popularity during Japan's Edo period, when its game boards would be printed in all shapes and sizes. Much of the game's appeal certainly came from its diverse and colorful themes, transforming a simple dice race into a guided tour of Japan's most famous travel destinations, a lesson about important historical events, or an advertisement for the newest kabuki play. The history behind 𝗏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕𝒆𝒏𝒕, however, goes back quite a bit further than the 17th century. At first sight, the game's rules might ring a bell with some board game enthusiasts, since they are in many ways similar to those of the ancient dice game now known as Snakes and Ladders, or even the medieval game of the goose. Although it is not impossible that these games share a common ancestor with 𝗏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕𝒆𝒏𝒕, this is difficult to prove, so let us focus on East Asia for now. While there are different theories regarding 𝗏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕𝒆𝒏𝒕's origin, one major point of discussion still today is the game's name. In Japanese, 𝗏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕 is commonly written using the following 3 Chinese characters, literally translating to picture double 6. The double 6 here is taken directly from the name of an ancient Chinese tables game that functions similarly to the Western backgammon and is now generally referred to as 𝗏𝒏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕 within Japan. This has led some researchers to argue that 𝗏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕 was originally a Japanese variant of the older Chinese 𝗏𝒏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕. However, this has not been proven and does seem unlikely, considering that the rules of the two games are drastically different, with their only true commonality being the use of dice. Instead, others have argued that 𝗏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕 possibly started out as the Chinese game of promotion, which can be traced back to at least the 9th century. Although this game is much more expansive in terms of rules, even featuring in-game money tokens, its game board does have a similar structure to 𝗏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕 and is centered around rising through the ranks of Imperial China's state bureaucracy. While the game's design is not quite as exciting, with ranks of civil servants in place of colorful pictures, there is a good reason for this. The game of promotion was likely created not for the general public, but to familiarize aspiring officials with the structure of the administration in a playful manner. Still, it did not take long for simplified variants that also included pictures to emerge, until eventually this game of promotion would come into touch with Buddhism. Buddhists were quick to realize the didactic value of the game and promptly swapped out the ranks of officials with Buddhist terminology, this time aiding novice monks in remembering all this jargon. And it is exactly this Buddhist adaptation of the Chinese game of promotion that then shows up in Japan, considered to be the earliest variant of the Japanese 𝗏𝒍𝒊𝒈𝒉𝒕, and suggesting that the game might have been brought to the archipelago alongside the transmission of Buddhism. This variant, dating back to at least the 15th century, was referred to as Pure Land Sugoroku, and it certainly stays true to its theme. Here, players race against each other not to reach some arbitrary goalpost, but to be reborn in Amida Buddha's paradisiacal Pure Land, where enlightenment awaits. Along the way, players traverse the 6 realms of existence and may be reincarnated as various Buddhist deities, or they might fall into one of the Buddhist hells, which, even in the game, are particularly difficult to get out of. It was likely on the basis of these Buddhist E-sugoroku that the later, more colorful variants of the Edo period were created. But the game's rise to fame does not end there. During Japan's Meiji period, E-sugoroku was even integrated into the nascent nation-state's modernized education system, for example motivating children to practice the Japanese alphabet. But it would also lend itself as a popular medium for nationalistic propaganda, glorifying the Japanese warrior spirit and inspiring the youth to enlist in the Imperial Japanese Army. Either way, E-sugoroku certainly carved out its spot within Japan's popular culture. And even though it has lost much of its momentum, present-day adaptations that hark back to the game's former glory can still be found. Some of my personal favorites include the incredibly bizarre Yu-Gi-Oh! Sugoroku, a Game Boy Advance game that came out in 2004, the Studio Ghibli Sugoroku that was handed out in the Ghibli Park last year, and likely the most famous modern interpretation of E-sugoroku, Nintendo's Mario Party. Let me know which variant of E-sugoroku you would like to try out. By the way, these are the sources that I used to make this video. I try to incorporate actual research rather than just rephrasing Wikipedia entries. Subscribe for more insights into Japanese history, language and culture.